Carlos, a student at the University of Texas, had always lived a peaceful life. But when he decided to travel to Ciudad Juarez with a few friends, something dark and unexpected began to unfold. The city, with its vibrant lights and threatening shadows, seemed like a place for parties and freedom. However, after a few drinks, he found himself alone, lost in a sea of strangers. Fear took over, but he had no idea of the terror that awaited him. Without realizing it, Carlos found himself near a protest that was about to turn into chaos. There, in those crowded streets filled with shouts, fear became a palpable reality. The yelling of people, the agitation in the air, and soon he saw hands grabbing him, pulling him into the heart of the turmoil. He tried to explain that he was just a student, lost and disoriented, but the weight of reality was stronger than his words. The violence and the pressure of being accused without reason made him fall silent, and soon the darkness swallowed him as he was taken to prison. Like a never-ending nightmare, the feeling of being dragged to an unknown fate terrified him even more. In prison, he was treated like a criminal, beaten by guards and prisoners alike, with no chance to defend himself. The environment, overcrowded and filthy, was like a refuge for terror. The fear of being forgotten behind those walls, of never seeing daylight again, consumed him. His thoughts were clouded by pain and rage, and the touch of those shadows seemed to follow him everywhere, as if there were no escape. Carlos didn't know that this incident, so random and unjust, would mark him forever in a way he could never imagine. The days in prison were a constant nightmare for Carlos. Every moment seemed to drag on in a sea of shadows. Beaten by other inmates, he felt fear invade his soul, as if the invisible hands of something bigger were tightening around him more and more. Every time he approached a guard, a chill ran down his spine, as if he were about to become just another victim of the system. And amidst all the chaos, he could barely tell whether he was trapped in his body or in his mind. The pain and fear were so intense that the hours seemed to lose their meaning. When, finally, freedom seemed close, Carlos thought the worst was over. But freedom, in reality, was an illusion. Upon being released, he realized his documents were gone. Something inside him, a feeling of emptiness he couldn't describe, left him paralyzed. The sensation of being stolen not only of his identity but also of his dignity haunted him. It wasn't just a simple loss, it was a deep blow that made him doubt the security of everything he knew. He searched his pockets, desperate, and the terror deepened when he realized there was nothing there. Without his documents and with the shadow of a deep trauma, Carlos had to face one more humiliation. The U.S. border didn't recognize his identity. The feeling of helplessness, of being nobody in a world where even the smallest details dictate your fate, settled in like a chronic pain. He couldn't understand how he had been brought down so easily, how something as simple as a piece of paper could determine his destiny. But life, as always, didn't leave room for questions, and soon he realized his journey was far from over. Carlos felt an indescribable relief when finally, after weeks of uncertainty, the U.S. border confirmed his identity. That relief, however, came with a weight he didn't know how to carry. He looked back at the city, now seeming so far away, but at the same time so close, like a shadow that stretches on forever. The fear, the terror of the prison, the feeling of being thrown into a place where no one cared, was etched in his mind. Though he was back in the safety of his home, something inside him would never be the same. The experience of being imprisoned in a foreign country with no one to help him, no chance to explain, left a mark on him. The trauma was a constant presence, like a ghost that followed him wherever he went. Even after returning, he couldn't escape the fear that had settled deep within him. Every conversation with strangers, every interaction with authorities, reminded him of that dark and terrifying place. He knew that, as much as he was physically home, a part of him had stayed back there, trapped between the shadows of an experience no one could fully understand. Trying to move on was harder than he imagined. Every night, when he closed his eyes, the terror of those weeks of fear and violence returned in nightmares. The fear was no longer of being imprisoned, but of never being able to escape the shadows that haunted him. The incident hadn't just stolen his documents, it had left an invisible scar, a sense of insecurity that would never fully fade. And the question Carlos now asked himself was, could he ever truly feel safe again? Or would that trauma, like a relentless shadow, remain a constant presence in his life? Carlos managed to return to his home, but something darker had settled inside him. The shadows of the prison, the fear of being thrown into a place where no one cared, followed him, silent and relentless. He thought the pain was over, but the truth was that terror has no end. And what happened to his documents? Who could have stolen everything? The emptiness that took the place of certainty gnawed at him, as if he were just a lost piece, a fragment of someone who no longer existed. Now, Carlos lives with the constant feeling that something is watching him, that the shadow of those weeks in prison never really faded. What more can be stolen from someone? Their certainties, their memories, their trust, or perhaps the freedom they fought so hard to regain. And you, what would you do if you were Carlos? How would you deal with such a deep trauma, something you can't just forget? If this story scared you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because stories like this, with their dark secrets and unexpected endings, are always waiting to be told.